They called it the Great Silence, the day the sky over Viridia fell. There was no fire, no thunder of orbital bombardment that humanity had been conditioned to fear from its old, savage stories. There was only a shimmering, opalescent mist that descended from the heavens, a gift from the cosmic benefactors known as the Stewardship. The mist settled over the emerald forests and sapphire oceans that Dr. Eris Thorne had spent a lifetime coaxing from a barren rock. He watched on a delayed feed from a Kuiper Belt relay, a helpless god observing his creation's unmaking. He saw the great arboreal spires he had designed, wonders of genetic engineering that breathed oxygen for 1 million colonists, begin to weep a thick, gray slime. The oceans, teeming with life he had personally sequenced, churned and turned the color of rust, then boiled away into a sterile, acrid fog. The Stewardship, a coalition of ancient species who viewed the galaxy as a carefully curated garden, had deemed humanity's rapid, joyful expansion a discordant note in their cosmic symphony. They called the mist the rebalancing, a gentle correction to revert a world to its primordial, lifeless state. On the feed, Eris watched his wife, Ilara, lead their daughter, Kala, back towards the sealed biodome, her face a mask of confusion, not terror. The mist was beautiful, and that was the most monstrous thing about it. It did not kill with violence. It simply erased. The last transmission was of Kala, her small hand pressed against the thick plasma glass of the main observatory, pointing at a flower she had planted, as its petals curled inward and dissolved into dust. Then the feed went dead, replaced by a placid message from the Stewardship: harmony has been restored. For 5 years, humanity had screamed into the void, and for 5 years, the only response was silence. They pleaded, they protested, they sent delegations that were politely turned away at the edge of regulated systems. The Stewardship did not see a species in mourning. They saw a petulant child who had lost a toy. It was in that crushing silence that Eris Thorne, the botanist who dreamed of green worlds, died and was reborn as something else. He did not seek justice. Justice was a concept for equals. He did not crave war. War was a clumsy tool of passion. Eris Thorne, now the cold, beating heart of a hidden resistance known as the mycelium, wanted only to teach. He would teach the beings who live for millennia on their worlds of sculpted light and placid thought the true meaning of loss. Now, standing on the cramped bridge of the repurposed asteroid miner Winter's Harvest, Eris watched his first lesson unfold. Their target swam in the view screen, a celestial jewel box known as the Emanation of Xylos. It was not a military base or a strategic outpost. It was a holy site, a living sanctuary cultivated by the Aetolians, the most aesthetically obsessed race within the Stewardship. The Emanation was a collection of hollowed-out planetoids, each containing a perfectly replicated and controlled ecosystem from 1,000 different worlds, a testament to the Stewardship's power to preserve and control life. It was their pride, their art, their soul. Kaylin Rostova, her face a web of old scar tissue from wars fought long before the Stewardship's peace, stood beside him, her knuckles white on the command console. All lances are primed. Auris, the cargo is ready for dispersal. Just give the word. Her voice was gravel and ozone, the voice of a warrior forced to serve a scientist. She trusted his mind, but she feared what was growing in the place where his heart used to be. Eris didn't answer immediately. He adjusted the magnification, his gaze lingering on the great, crystalline domes of the central planetoid, through which pulsated the soft, internal light of bioluminescent flora. They see life as a thing to be collected, curated, he whispered, the sound barely audible over the hum of the ship's life support. A series of beautiful static paintings. They need to learn that life is also a verb. It consumes. It corrupts. It grows. He turned to Kalen, his eyes as empty and gray as the sludge Viridia had become. Deploy the lesson. Kalen gave the order. From the underbelly of the winter's harvest, a single, dark canister was launched. It was not a bomb. It contained no explosives, no radiation, no elegant entropy field. It was a seed cultivated in the darkest, most secret labs of the mycelium, hidden in the hollowed-out moons of gas giants. It was a perversion of Eris's own life's work, a hyper-aggressive, relentlessly adaptive fungal spore he had named Viridia's Lament. The canister breached the emanation's atmospheric shields as if they were soap bubbles. The Aetolians on duty likely registered it as a minor meteorite, unworthy of concern. Inside their pristine biomes, they tended to their perfect gardens, wholly unaware of the storm that had just been sown. For hours, nothing happened. The mycelium fleet, a small, ugly flotilla of retrofitted industrial vessels, watched from the cover of a dense asteroid field. Then, a single sensor on Kalen's console blinked red, then another, and another. On the main view screen, a dark patch appeared on the largest of the celestial domes, like a spot of mold on a perfect piece of fruit. But it was growing, visibly growing. Eris zoomed in. The fungus was not merely covering the surface, it was consuming it. The crystalline structures dissolved under its touch, repurposed into the building blocks of the organisms. Great, pulsating hyphae, the color of bruised flesh, tore through the domes, and the carefully controlled atmospheres vented into space in silent, glittering plumes. Within a day, the emanation of Xylos was unrecognizable. It was a horror, a cancerous, throbbing mass of fungal growth that pulsed with a sickening, internal luminescence. Twisted, monstrous fruiting bodies, mockeries of the delicate flowers the Aetolians had worshipped, erupted from its surface, spewing black spores into the void. It was not dead, it was transformed into a monument of obscene vitality, a garden of rot. The first stewardship vessel to respond was not a warship. It was a diplomatic cruiser, the Luminous Path, sent to investigate the sudden communications blackout. Its approach was slow, majestic, radiating an aura of serene authority. The mycelium watched it glide toward the corrupted sanctuary, its golden hull gleaming against the darkness. "They think it's a natural phenomenon," Kalen growled, her hand hovering over the weapons console. "An anomaly. They can't even conceive that we could do this." "Patience, Captain," Eris said, his voice a flat line. "The lesson is not yet complete." As the luminous path drew closer, its captain broadcasting condescending offers of aid, the monstrosity that was once the emanation seemed to stir. One of the largest fungal stalks, a tower of gray flesh miles high, shuddered and then burst, releasing a cloud of spores so dense it looked like a storm front in space. The cloud enveloped the stewardship cruiser. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the ship's golden hull began to corrode, tiny filaments of mycelium spreading across its surface, eating into the exotic alloys like acid. Lights flickered and died. The ship's elegant solar sails, designed to drink light from distant stars, blackened and crumbled. The luminous path was being digested. It was only then that the ambush was sprung, using a crude, unstable form of FTL that bent space in unpredictable ways. The winter's harvest and its escorts tore into existence around the crippled cruiser. They didn't fire lasers or plasma torpedoes. Their primary weapon was a gravitational lance, a forbidden piece of technology that created a focused, localized distortion in space-time. Kalen targeted the luminous path's engines. The lance fired, not with a flash of light, but with a sickening ripple in the fabric of space itself. On the view screen, the stars behind the cruiser seemed to warp and twist. The ship groaned, its superstructure bending under gravitational forces it was never designed to withstand. It was crippled, helpless. A fly caught in a spider's web. The screams began then, broadcast on an open channel. They were sounds of disbelief turning to sheer, uncomprehending terror. The Atolians, a species that had not known true fear for 10,000 years, were watching their beautiful vessel being consumed from the outside in by a biological nightmare, while a fleet of ugly, wasteland primitive human ships held them in place. This was the true weapon, not the fungus, not the gravity lance, but the horror. Eris Thorn stood transfixed, the alien screams reflecting in his dead eyes. He was forcing the gods of this galaxy to look into the abyss he now called home, as the luminous path was slowly pulled into the grotesque, fungal mass of the dead sanctuary, its hull groaning its last death throes. Kalen looked over at the still, silent man beside her. For the first time since she had known him, a single tear traced a clean path through the 5 years of grime and grief on Eris Thorn's face. The lesson had begun. The silence that followed the destruction of the emanation was more unnerving than any declaration of war. For 3 weeks, the mycelium fleet drifted like ghosts in the Oort cloud of a dead star, monitoring the stewardship's comm channels. The response was not what Kalen Rostova had expected. There were no fleets mobilizing, no thunderous condemnations broadcast across the galaxy. Instead, there was a carefully orchestrated campaign of dismissal. The stewardship framed the event at Xylos as a tragic, naturally occurring blight, a previously unknown spaceborne extremophile that had found a fertile home in the Aetolian sanctuary. The loss of the luminous path was mentioned only in passing. Its crew mourned as heroic first responders who fell victim to a poorly understood cosmic hazard. They were quarantining the entire sector, not as a military blockade, but as a public health measure. It was brilliant, it was condescending, and it was exactly what Eris had predicted. He spent those weeks in his lab aboard the Winter's Harvest, a sterile white chamber that was a cruel parody of his old genetics workshop on Viridia. Instead of nurturing life, he was now its most imaginative torturer. He worked with a chilling focus, surrounded by holographic displays of writhing genetic code and nutrient vats, where new strains of Viridia's lament bubbled and grew. Kalen found him there, staring at a magnified image of a single spore. It was a thing of impossible complexity, its surface covered in microscopic hooks and filaments that Eris was constantly refining. "They're calling it the Xylos decay," Kalen said, her voice cutting through the low hum of the lab. "They've dispatched their ecological core. Scientists, not soldiers. They still don't see us. Eris, they think they're fighting a disease." Eris turned from the display, his face illuminated by its sickly green glow. There were dark circles under his eyes, but the eyes themselves burned with an intellectual fire that was far more terrifying than simple hatred. "That's because they are," he said. "They just don't understand that we are the pathogen. A disease doesn't declare war. It spreads. It finds a new host." He gestured to a separate, isolated containment field. Inside, a shimmering, almost incorporeal mist swirled. It looked disturbingly like the rebalancing agent that had erased his world. Their arrogance is the perfect growth medium. They believe their systems are inviolable. Their technology so far beyond ours that it operates on a different plane of reality. Their communication network, the chorus, isn't based on radio waves. It's a network of quantum-entangled biocomputers, relays grown from the neural tissue of a silicon-based life form. They think of it as instantaneous, pure, and utterly secure. Kalen frowned. "What are you getting at?" Eris's lips pulled into a thin, mirthless smile. "You cannot bomb a thought. You cannot shoot an idea. But you can infect it." He tapped a command into the console, and the image of the spore was replaced by a complex waveform. "This is strain beta, the echo spore. It doesn't consume matter. It consumes information. It's designed to interface with the organic components of their chorus relays. Once inside, it won't destroy the network. It will become the network. It will lie dormant, replicating silently, until every message, every piece of data, every serene announcement from the Stewardship High Council is routed through it." He looked at Kalen, his expression one of a teacher revealing a profound, terrible secret. "And when we activate it, the chorus will no longer be a symbol of their unity. It will become our broadcast system. We will replace their harmony with a symphony of screams. The last moments of the luminous path, the agony of Viridia, the sight of Xylos rotting from within, we will inject our truth directly into their minds." Kalen felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. This was beyond war. This was a violation of the soul. "How do we get it there?" she asked, her voice low. "Their central hub, the Cygnus Array, is the most heavily guarded place in the galaxy." "We won't go to the hub," Eris replied, his gaze returning to the swirling mist in the containment field. "The network is decentralized. We'll infect a peripheral node, a place they would never think to protect, a cultural archive on a small world named Lyra 7. The Lyrians are a client race, archivists and historians. Their planet is a library, not a fortress. The mission was one of infiltration, not assault. They couldn't use the winter's harvest or its crude tear drive. For this, they used a single captured stewardship courier vessel, the Stellifer, a ship designed to look like a sliver of polished obsidian. Its stealth systems were light years beyond anything humanity had ever built. Inside, there were only 4 of them Ares, who refused to let his creation out of his sight. Kalen, who trusted no one else to command the mission. A pilot named Jax, a wiry man whose entire family had been on a freighter decommissioned for violating a stewardship trade route. And a young tech prodigy named Lena, an orphan from a fringe colony who could communicate with alien computer systems as if they were her native language. Lena was the key. Her job was to create a data packet, a harmless-looking request for historical records from the Lyrian archive, and nested deep within the packet's code, shielded by layers of her own custom-written encryption, would be the digital carrier signal for the Echo Spore. As the Stellifer sliced through the silent, regulated space of the stewardship core, Eris prepared the payload. He didn't load a canister or a warhead. He stood before a small, ornate pedestal in the ship's cargo bay, a piece of salvaged Aetolian technology that interfaced directly with the ship's comms laser. He placed a single petri dish onto the pedestal. In the dish, the ethereal mist of the echospore pulsed faintly. It was beautiful, deadly. He was using their own art to transmit his plague. Lena worked for 48 straight hours, her fingers flying across a holographic console, sweat beading on her brow. She was coaxing the ship's systems to accept their profane cargo, weaving Eris's biological code into the sterile logic of the stewardship's data stream. "It's ready," she finally whispered, her voice raw with exhaustion. The Archive's quantum firewall is polite. It's designed to welcome requests, not repel attacks. It's asking for our credentials. Kalen looked at Eris. This is it. Once we send this, we can't take it back. Eris simply nodded. From the ship's cockpit, Lyra 7 was a tranquil blue marble. There were no orbital platforms, no defense fleets, just the serene confidence of a world that had never known a threat. Jax aimed the communications laser at the planet. Transmitting, Lena said. A beam of light, invisible to the naked eye, shot from the stellifer and touched the surface of Lyra 7. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a confirmation signal returned. Request accepted. Lena breathed, a look of disbelief on her face. They're processing it. The packet is inside their system. The spore was delivered. The virus was in the bloodline. They turned the stellifer around and vanished back into the dark, leaving behind a silent world that was now the incubator for galactic insanity. They waited for 2 full cycles. The mycelium watched and listened as the spore silently propagated. It was a time of agonizing tension. The fleet remained dispersed, running on minimal power. Every crew member aware that they had just committed an act from which there was no return. On the 3rd day, it began. It started small, a flicker in a news broadcast from the stewardship capital. For a single frame, the serene face of the Vexen Chancellor was replaced with a flash-frozen image of a screaming Aetolian from the luminous path. It was so fast, most viewers probably dismissed it as a technical glitch. Then, reports of communication dropouts began to trickle in from remote sectors. But the lines weren't dead. They were filled with a low, whispering static that, when amplified, sounded like wind blowing through the skeletal trees of a dead world. The stewardship's official response was that the chorus was undergoing unscheduled maintenance to purge the lingering effects of the Xylos decay anomaly. But the fear was spreading faster than their placid explanations. Eris stood on the bridge of the Winter's Harvest. A dozen comms channels opened before him. It's time, he said to Kalen. Activate it. All of it. Lena, back at her station on the main bridge, sent the activation command, a simple, encrypted pulse that would awaken every spore now nested in the chorus network. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Across thousands of worlds, the serene voice of the stewardship was silenced. In its place, the mycelium broadcast its sermon of pain. On the public view screen of a bustling trade hub, the image of a thriving city dissolved into a high-resolution view of the emanation of Xylos, its fungal towers pulsing in a grotesque parody of life. In the private chambers of a high-ranking military commander, a secure channel suddenly blasted the sound of his own ship's hull being torn apart by gravity lances, a recording from a mycelium raid a year prior. Financial data streams were corrupted, not with false numbers, but with the genetic code of Viridia's lament, turning economic forecasts into biological horror. The chorus, the symbol of their enlightened unity, had become a torrent of weaponized grief. The galaxy was not silent anymore. It was screaming. From the distant, heavily fortified core of the stewardship, a new signal cut through the chaos. It was stark, cold, and devoid of any condescension. It was a single, repeated glyph, broadcast on all emergency frequencies, overriding the mycelium's ghost in the machine. Kalen's console translated it instantly. It's a fleet mobilization order, she said, her voice grim. Class 1 threat. They're not sending scientists anymore. Eris. Before them, a star chart illuminated with the stewardship's response. Hundreds of warships, like silver needles, were converging on the outer sectors, sweeping the dark, ungoverned spaces where humanity had been allowed to fester. They were no longer trying to contain a disease. They were preparing to cauterize a wound. Eris watched the approaching tide of enemy ships, his face an unreadable mask. He had forced them to see humanity, to acknowledge their existence as something other than a footnote in their grand cosmic garden. He had broken their silence and shattered their peace. Now, the true storm was coming, and he had made his people the heart of it. The stewardship's response was not a war. It was an extermination. The fleet that swept through the outer sectors was called the Purification Armada, a name that spoke volumes of their intent. Their ships were things of lethal elegance, bearing little resemblance to the boxy, functional vessels of the mycelium. They moved with the silent, coordinated grace of a predator, their weapons firing not crude explosives, but beams of coherent light that unraveled matter at the atomic level. They did not conquer worlds, they sterilized them. Any outpost, asteroid base, or listening post with a human life sign was simply erased. Its orbit scoured clean until nothing remained but shimmering dust and the ghost of a gravitational signature. The mycelium fleet, scattered and vastly outnumbered, could only watch the slaughter through the fractured lens of their corrupted chorus. They saw colony ships, filled with families fleeing the encroaching purge, wink out of existence in silent flashes of light. They intercepted panicked, final transmissions that were cut short not by static, but by an absolute, final nothingness. The weaponized grief they had injected into the network was now answered with a tidal wave of genuine, immediate death. Kaylin Rostova watched the red icons on the tactical map vanish one by one, each a human settlement she had known, and felt the cold fire of her warrior's rage being banked by the sheer, overwhelming scale of the loss. Her bridge crew, hardened veterans all, worked in grim silence, their faces reflecting the cold, hard light of the star chart. The mycelium was being systematically dismantled. They had been so focused on their psychological attack that they were woefully unprepared for a conventional war against a foe whose industrial and technological might was centuries beyond their own. She found Eris not on the bridge, but in the ship's arboretum. It was the only place on the winter's harvest that wasn't gray. Recycled metal, a small climate-controlled dome where he cultivated Terran plants from a seed bank he'd guarded more closely than his own life. It was a pocket of defiance, a living memory of the world he had lost. He was tending to a small, thorny rosebush, his long fingers gently pruning a withered leaf. He didn't look like the architect of a galactic insurgency. He looked like a tired old gardener. "They're hunting us." "Eris," Kaylin said, foregoing any formality. "The fleet is scattered. We've lost contact with the Prometheus and the Iron Duke. They're using quantum resonance tracking to follow the tear drive signatures. Our greatest advantage is now a beacon leading them right to us." Eris didn't look up from his work. "A wounded animal thrashes," he said, his voice calm. "It is a predictable response. They believe that if they excise the infection, the body will heal. They are still thinking like gardeners. And we are the weeds they're pulling," she countered, her voice tight with frustration. "This isn't a lesson anymore. It's a route. We need to run, regroup, find a place so deep in the uncharted voids they can't follow." "There is no such place," Eris said, finally turning to face her. His eyes, however, were not focused on her, but on something far beyond the metal confines of the ship. "Their maps are more complete than ours. There is no corner of this galaxy they do not know. But there are places on those maps they have marked as forbidden, places they do not go, not because they are empty, but because they are not." He walked over to a terminal hidden amongst the foliage and brought up a star chart. He pointed to a region of space that was a chaotic mess of gravitational anomalies and stellar nurseries. It was known colloquially as the Graveyard of Empires, a place where, millennia ago, several precursor races had annihilated each other in a war of unimaginable scale. The stewardship had declared the entire sector an eternal quarantine zone, a memorial to the dangers of unchecked ambition. "The Accord of Silence," Eris whispered, tracing a line through the heart of the region. That was the treaty that ended the Precursor Wars and formed the basis of the stewardship. They pledged to never again awaken the kind of weapons that were used there. Their most sacred law is to let the ghosts of that war lie sleeping. Kalen stared at the map. "You want to hide in a haunted house." "Not hide," Eris corrected. "I want to acquire a new textbook. The stewardship fears its own history. The weapons that destroyed the precursors were not just powerful, they were conceptual, reality-altering. Things that treated the laws of physics as suggestions. Their fear of those weapons is greater than their hatred of us. It's the one place they will not follow." He zoomed in on a specific point in the graveyard, a trinary star system surrounded by a massive, shattered sphere of artificial construction. This is designated Anomaly Zero, the epicenter of the final battle. According to the data Lena pulled from the Lyrian archives, it was once a Dyson sphere, the heart of an empire built by a species known only as the Architects. And at its core, they didn't build a star harvester. They built a weapon. A weapon that has been dormant for 1,000,000 years, Kalen said, skeptical, assuming it even still exists. "It exists," Eris said with unnerving certainty. "The stewardship has it surrounded with a network of sentinels, ancient, automated platforms designed for one purpose: to keep everything within that sphere from ever getting out. They aren't guarding a tomb, Captain. They are guarding a prison." The decision was an act of supreme desperation, broadcasting a general retreat order to all surviving mycelium cells. Eris set a single course, Anomaly Zero. The journey was a harrowing flight through the closing dragnet of the Purification Armada. Jax piloted the winter's harvest with a mad genius, making blind micro-jumps through unstable asteroid fields and using the gravitational pull of a rogue black hole to slingshot them across a sector, shaking their pursuers. Twice they were nearly cornered, forced to deploy their remaining gravity lances not as weapons, but as a defensive screen, warping the space around them into a chaotic mess that blinded the stewardship's precise targeting systems. They bled ships and people. The small flotilla that followed them into the graveyard was a fraction of their former strength, a collection of battered, scarred vessels limping toward a final, uncertain hope. As they crossed the quarantine line, the universe changed. The clean, orderly space of the stewardship gave way to a cosmic battlefield. The wreckage of precursor fleets drifted in silent. Colossal shoals, ships the size of moons, their hulls rent by forces that had torn holes in reality itself. Ghostly energy signatures flickered in the void, echoes of weapons fire that had happened before humanity had even learned to make fire. The crew of the winter's harvest fell into a hushed awe. This was a place of gods and monsters, and they were trespassing on sacred, blood-soaked ground. Lena, her face pale, monitored the incoming data streams. "I'm picking up something," she stammered, her usual confidence gone. "It's not communication. It's a whisper. Underneath the static, a repeating mathematical sequence. It's old, very old." As they drew closer to the shattered Dyson sphere, the sentinels appeared. They were not ships. They were monolithic structures of black, non-reflective material, shaped like perfect geometric solids cubes, tetrahedrons, dodecahedrons. They were utterly silent, showing no energy readings, no signs of propulsion. They simply were, and they were moving to intercept. "They're blocking our path," Jax reported, his hands tight on the controls. "Weapons?" Kalen asked. "None that I can detect," Eris answered from his station, his eyes glued to the sensor readings. "They are not weapons. They are boundary markers. The terms of the Accord of Silence made manifest." One of the sentinels, a perfect cube larger than their ship, drifted directly into their path. It broadcast a single, simple message, not in language, but in pure mathematics, a concept that transcended species. The translation appeared on Kalen's screen: "Leave or be unmade." "It's a warning," she said. Eris shook his head. "It's a law, but it's a law written for the signatories of the Accord. We never signed." He looked at Jax. "Take us in. Go around it." Jax threaded the needle, maneuvering the winter's harvest through a gap between two of the silent, imposing sentinels. The moment they crossed the boundary, a low, resonant hum vibrated through the hull of the ship. It wasn't a sound, it was a feeling, a deep thrumming that seemed to resonate in their very bones. The whispering Lena had detected grew louder, no longer just a mathematical sequence, but a cacophony of voices, Kiol, speaking in 1,000 dead languages, all clamoring over one another. And in the center of the shattered sphere, something began to glow, a faint, pulsing blue light, like a dying heartbeat, emanated from the core of Anomaly Zero. It had been waiting. They had passed the wardens and entered the prison. Now, they were about to meet the prisoner. The light at the heart of Anomaly Zero was a siren's call in the cosmic graveyard. As the remnants of the mycelium fleet limped past the silent sentinels, the whispering in their comm systems intensified, coalescing from a chaotic babble into a single, coherent thought. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't language. It was a direct and conceptual transmission that bypassed hearing and imprinted itself directly onto the consciousness of every human on every ship. "Who are you?" The question was not hostile. It was ancient, patient, and filled with a profound, soul-deep weariness, like a prisoner asking the name of a new guard. On the bridge of the winter's harvest, the crew froze, hands hovering over their consoles. Lena ripped her headset off and her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. "It's in my head," she whispered. "It's reading us." Eris Thorne remained unnervingly calm. He stood before the main view screen, which was now dominated by the growing blue light, and closed his eyes as if listening to a familiar piece of music. "It is the architect," he said, his voice barely a murmur. "The weapon. It's a consciousness." Kalen moved to his side, her hand resting on the hilt of the sidearm she had taken to wearing since the purge began. "What does it want?" "You are not of the old ones," the presence communicated, its voice now focused, as if it had finally tuned itself to their primitive minds. "You are new. Your pain is so loud. It is the first thing I have felt in an eon. Tell me, loud ones, who broke you?" Eris opened his eyes. "They call themselves the Stewardship," he said, speaking aloud to the empty space of the bridge. "They are the descendants of your old enemies. They inherited this galaxy and built a garden over your graves." A feeling of something akin to dry, mirthless laughter echoed through their minds. It was a cold, alien amusement, devoid of humor. The gardeners. Yes, I remember them. They were the ones who cowered behind their laws and treaties while we reshaped existence. They feared our art, So, they locked the artist away and called the gallery a tomb. "You have brought your cage to my door. Why, we didn't come here to free you." Kaylin cut in, her voice a defiant growl, speaking to the air. "We came for a weapon." "I am the weapon," the architect replied, the thought sharp enough to cause a spike of pain behind their eyes. "The anomaly you see is not my prison. It is my body. This Dyson sphere was not built to harness a star. It was built to contain my mind, and the weapon you seek is my final, terrible thought, an idea I conceived at the end of the Great War, an equation that, once solved, would have unmade my enemies from the timeline itself. I was persuaded to leave it unfinished." "Persuaded by who?" Ares asked, his scientific curiosity overriding his caution. The mental voice fell silent for a long moment, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than weariness touched their minds, a ghost of ancient sorrow. "By myself. I saw the shape of a universe where I was victorious. It was silent, empty, perfect, and I could not bear it. So, I stopped. I allowed them to build this cage around me, and I have slept ever since, dreaming of nothing." A new wave of dread washed over Kaylin. This was not some ancient superweapon they could simply turn on and aim. This was a god, a thinking, feeling being of unimaginable power who had willingly chosen imprisonment over a victory that would have cost it everything. "We're leaving," she said, turning to Jax. "Get us out of here. There is nothing for us in this place." Leaving the architect's thought intruded, and now there was a new tone, a hint of something stirring from its long dormancy. "But you have already given me a gift. Your pain, it has reminded me of what it is to feel, to lose. It has reminded me why I fought. You want a weapon. Little ones, I will give you a weapon, but it is not a thing you can carry. It is a choice you must make." The blue light at the center of the sphere pulsed, and a stream of data, raw and impossibly dense, poured directly into the ship's computers. Alarms blared as every system overloaded simultaneously. Lena screamed and collapsed, a trickle of blood running from her nose as the sheer volume of information tried to force its way into her mind through her neural interface. "What is it?" Kaylin yelled, rushing to the young tech's side. "It's a schematic," Eris breathed, staring at the torrent of alien code scrolling across the main screen. "But it's not for a machine. It's biological. A retrovirus. A way to rewrite genetic code on a conceptual level. They took your world," the architect explained, its voice resonating with a newfound purpose. "I offer you the chance to take their reality. This code will not kill them. It will change them. It will strip them of their millennia of placid evolution. It will reawaken the dormant predator instincts, the fear, the rage, the ambition they bred out of themselves in their quest for harmony. I will turn their perfect garden back into a savage, beautiful jungle. I will make them like you." Kaylin stared at Eris in horror. "He wants to devolve them to turn them into monsters." "Not monsters, Eris corrected, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying, ecstatic light. He was no longer a grieving scientist. He was a prophet receiving a new gospel. He wants to make them equals. He wants to give them the gift of being broken. It's poetic. The choice is yours." The architect concluded, "Unleash this plague, and the stewardship will collapse from within. Their purification armada will turn on itself. Their serene worlds will erupt into civil war. They will be too busy tearing each other apart to ever trouble you again. All you must do is build the vessel for the code and release it into their primary nutrient streams. the very source of their placid existence. But be warned, once the cage of their harmony is broken, the beasts within will be free forever. You will not have allies. You will simply have a galaxy of shattered rivals. The presence began to recede, the blue light dimming, the overwhelming mental pressure lifting. The offer had been made. The god was returning to its slumber. Silence descended upon the bridge of the winter's harvest, broken only by Lena's ragged breathing and the dying whine of overloaded systems. Kaylin helped the young woman to her feet, her own mind reeling from the terrible proposition. It was a path to survival, a way to win a war they were destined to lose, but the cost was monstrous. It was a sin on a galactic scale. She looked at the faces of her crew. She saw the exhaustion, the fear, and the burning embers of hatred for the stewardship that had taken so much from them. Then she looked at Eris. He was already at a console, his fingers flying, trying to salvage the schematic from the ship's fried computer core. There was no hesitation in his eyes, no moral conflict. He saw only a solution, elegant and final. "We can't," Kaylin said, her voice shaking but firm. "Eris, we cannot do this. We wanted to teach them a lesson, not become the extinction-level event the precursors were." Eris turned to her, and for the first time, she saw the full, terrifying depth of his transformation. The gentle botanist was gone, buried under the sterile dust of Viridia. In his place was a cold, logical engine of vengeance. "They taught us that there is no such thing as a proportionate response," he said, his voice as flat and dead as deep space. "They taught us that when you hold the power of a god, you either use it to create or to erase. There is no middle ground. They chose to erase us. I am simply choosing to rewrite them." He turned back to his work. "Jax, find us a place to hide. A rogue moon. A dead nebula. Somewhere we can rebuild our systems and begin construction. Lena, once you've recovered, I need you to help me stabilize the Architect's code." Kaylin watched him, and a chasm opened between them, wider and colder than the void outside. She had followed this man out of loyalty, out of a shared desire for justice. But this was no longer justice. This was the meticulous, passionless creation of a new and terrible dark age. She had thought the enemy was the purification armada bearing down on them. She was wrong. The true enemy was standing right here on her bridge, holding the blueprint for a plague of the soul. And he was humming a forgotten Terran folk song as he worked. The fleet of the mycelium did not heal in the graveyard of empires. It festered. They found refuge in the shadow of a dead precursor dreadnought, a metal leviathan whose corpse was so vast it generated its own weak gravitational field. Here, under the ghostly light of a distant pulsar, a cold civil war was waged in the silent corridors and cramped mess halls of the surviving ships. There were no battles, only the drawing of lines. On one side was Eris Thorn, who had turned the winter's harvest's arboretum into his new laboratory and sanctuary. He worked with a serene, terrifying focus, attended by a handful of true believers who saw in his terrible vision the only possible path to victory. On the other side was Kaylin Rostova, and with her, the weary, the broken, and the sane. She commanded the fleet's remaining combat-ready ships, maintaining a tense perimeter, as much to protect them from the stewardship as from the man she once followed. Jax and most of the veteran pilots sided with her, their pragmatism outweighing any thirst for apocalyptic vengeance. Lena, however, remained with Eris. Kaylin saw her once, a ghost on a comm screen, her eyes hollow, her hands moving with mechanical precision as she helped Eris translate the Architect's biological scripture into a deliverable sequence. She wasn't a zealot. She was a prisoner, trapped by the gravity of Eris's intellect and the trauma of what she had witnessed. Kaylin spent her days trying to hold their shattered society together, organizing repair crews and rationing supplies. But her nights were spent staring at the winter's harvest, now more a temple than a warship, knowing that a plague of the soul was being brewed within its hull. The breaking point came 3 weeks after their arrival, a coded message from Jax, who still had a loyal contact on Eris's ship, confirmed Kaylin's worst fears. "It's done," the message read. "The primary culture is stable. He's loading it into a series of stealth drones. He plans to send them into the stewardship's agro systems through a tear drive jump. He's calling it the sowing." Kaylin knew then that the time for words was over. She left her command ship with a small, hand-picked team, their weapons set to stun, their faces grim. They docked with the winter's harvest under the pretense of a supply transfer, their boots echoing in the unnervingly quiet corridors. They found Eris in the Arboretum. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming nightshade. He stood in the center of the dome, surrounded by the vibrant green life that was a constant, cruel reminder of Viridia. In his hands, he held a single glowing vial. The retrovirus shimmered within it, a liquid promise of galactic madness. "You shouldn't have come here, Kaylin," he said, not turning. His voice was gentle, the voice of the botanist she remembered, and it was more chilling than any shout. "I was a gardener," he continued, finally facing her, his eyes full of a vast, sorrowful emptiness. "I know that to help a forest grow, you must sometimes introduce a fire to clear away the rot, the decay, the things that choke the light. The stewardship is a monoculture. It is beautiful and orderly, and it is a biological dead end. I am not destroying them. I am reintroducing the beautiful, terrible chaos of life itself." "You are introducing hell," Kaylin countered, her voice low and steady, her weapon held loosely at her side. "You're going to burn a galaxy to warm your own hands. Eris, look at us. We're a handful of survivors hiding in a tomb. This isn't victory. It's a suicide note written in the blood of 1 trillion souls." "It is justice," he whispered, holding the vial up to the light. "It's an echo, a reflection of what they did to us. I will make their minds as barren as they made our worlds." "No," Kaylin said, and in that single word was the weight of her decision. "The lesson is over." She raised her weapon. Eris did not flinch. He simply smiled, a sad but broken expression. "You are still trying to save the garden, Kaylin, but you don't understand. The garden is already dead. We are just the ghosts who haunt it." Behind him, Lena and 2 of his followers raised their own weapons. The Arboretum, once a symbol of hope, became a standoff zone, the scent of roses mixing with the acrid smell of charged power cells. The fight was brutally short. It was not a battle of soldiers, but of broken people. Kaylin's team moved with grim efficiency, their stun blasts filling the air with ozone. Lena fired once, her shot going wide, before she crumpled to the ground, not from a weapon, but from the sheer, crushing weight of her own actions. Kaylin faced Eris alone. He made no move to fire his weapon. He simply looked at her, his expression one of profound disappointment. Then, with a deliberate, almost ceremonial slowness, he moved to smash the vial against the edge of a planter. Kaylin fired. The stun bolt caught him in the chest, and he collapsed amongst the roses. The vial flying from his hand, it skittered across the floor, miraculously intact, coming to a rest at the foot of a thorn bush. The silence that fell was heavier than any planet. Eris Thorn, the father of the mycelium, lay unconscious, defeated not by his enemy, but by his own last, remaining friend. In the aftermath, Kaylin Rostova became a leader of a different kind. She was not a prophet. She was a warden. Eris was confined to his quarters, the arboretum sealed, his mind lost in a silent fugue from which it would never emerge. He became a living monument to the abyss they had stared into, the architect's plague. The retrovirus contained in that single vial was secured in a quantum stasis chamber in the deepest part of the winter's harvest. Kaylin could not bring herself to destroy it. It was too terrible and too powerful. It became their final secret, their ultimate deterrent, the gun they would never fire, the sin they would carry for him. The mycelium fractured. Some, still loyal to Eris's vision, took their ships and vanished into the uncharted black, becoming true pirates and raiders, a bitter, fading echo of the rebellion's original fury. But most stayed. They stayed with Kaylin. She gathered the remnants of her people in the shadow of the dead godship and gave them a new purpose. Their war was over. The rage that had fueled them was banked, transformed not into peace, but into a quiet, fierce resolve. They were no longer a weapon of vengeance. They were seeds. They became a nomadic fleet of scavengers and explorers, forever haunting the graveyard of empires. Their home now the one place in the galaxy their enemies feared to tread. They were the ghosts of humanity. They would survive, not by burning the galaxy, but by remembering the cost of the fire. Kaylin stood on the bridge of the winter's harvest, looking out at the colossal wreckage of the precursor fleets. The Purification Armada was still out there, its mission of extermination likely continuing unabated in the galaxy beyond. The stewardship still reigned in its placid, silent garden. By all accounts, humanity had lost. But as she watched a new generation of children, born in the darkness between dead stars, play in the corridors of her ship, she knew they had won the only victory that mattered. They had stared into the heart of their own rage, into the perfect, terrible logic of vengeance, and they had chosen, against all odds, to step back. The silence they had once fought so hard to break was now their greatest shield, and in its cold, endless embrace, they would endure